For 10 years, they fought for England. They were privateers, licensed to raid Spanish ships in the War of Spanish Succession, a war that began when the childless king of Spain died, and half of Europe tried to claim his throne. France and Spain on one side, England, Austria, Portugal, and the Dutch on the other. By 1713, everyone was exhausted, and nations on both sides were bankrupt. The treaties were signed in the Dutch city of Utrecht, a stack of papers that would redraw the map and change everything for the men doing the fighting. The Treaty of Utrecht did what treaties do: traded land, settled borders, made kings happy. Philip V kept Spain, Austria got the Spanish Netherlands, Savoy got Sicily, and England got Gibraltar and Minorca, two rocks that still fly the British flag today. But England got something else, something the negotiators in powdered wigs barely mentioned in public, but fought hard for in private. England won the Asiento de Negros. It was a monopoly to supply enslaved Africans to Spain's American colonies. 30 years of exclusive access to the most profitable slave trade in the world. England's merchants had wanted this for decades, and they could not have been happier. They got it at Utrecht. They traded peace for human lives and called it a victory. Beyond this disgraceful and disgusting practice, there was something else the treaty didn't mention. The men who'd done the fighting, the privateers who'd spent 10 years taking prizes, capturing Spanish ships, living on the edge of death and profit, they weren't invited to the table. When the war ended, their commissions ended. Overnight, thousands of experienced sailors were stranded in the Caribbean. No jobs, no pay, no way home. Just ships and guns and a lifetime of knowing how to take what they needed to survive. Spain, meanwhile, still had guardacostas, coast guards, patrolling their waters, and they still attacked English ships. Because now, without papers, those English sailors weren't privateers anymore. They were just pirates. And pirates could be killed without consequence, even for their actions during the war. England knew what was happening. England didn't care. The merchants had what they wanted. They had the asiento, they had the trade routes, they had the profits. The sailors could rot. And rot they did. Or rather, they didn't. The now pirates made their own way, their own rules, and their own flag. They looked at the ships crossing the Caribbean. Spanish, French, English, it didn't matter anymore. Why should they be loyal to any nation that would abandon them? They took whatever they wanted. And here's what those sailors knew, what every privateer and every tavern in Nassau knew. For 10 years, while the war raged, Spain's treasure had been piling up in the Americas. In Veracruz, silver from the Mexican mines filled the royal warehouses. Newly minted coins, fresh from the presses, waiting for ships that never came. In Portobelo, Panama, it was different. Peruvian silver came by sea to Panama City, then crossed the isthmus on mule trains. Hundreds of animals, each loaded with silver bars, climbing through jungle, ending at the harbor in Portobelo. This harbor was guarded by 2 forts and was filled with more wealth than most kings ever saw. In Cartagena, gold from new mines in the interior, emeralds from Colombia, and slaves, thousands of them, brought under the asiento and traded for silver. And Havana, the place where all the treasure gathered before the fleet sailed for Spain. By 1715, the warehouses in Havana were overflowing, unable to be moved due to the war. 11 years of accumulated wealth, silver, gold, emeralds, pearls, and porcelain, stacked and just waiting. Nothing had been moved, for fear that English fleets would intercept them. Spain needed that treasure. The war had bankrupted them. Soldiers had gone unpaid. Merchants were refusing further credit. Philip V was a new king trying to hold his throne together. And to make matters worse, the wedding gift he had promised his new queen was in one of those harbors. So in 1715, under immense pressure, he finally ordered the fleet to sail. It was 11 ships, one of the richest fleets to ever cross the ocean. They left Havana on June 11th. They sailed north, riding the Gulf Stream. They were following the same route fleets had used for 200 years, and they thought they'd made it. On July 31st, at 2 in the morning, a hurricane found them off the Florida coast. All 11 ships were blown off course and lost. Over 1,000 men drowned, though a nearby French escort vessel survived and made it back to Europe. Treasure was scattered across the seafloor and washed up on beaches. It should be pointed out that while all 11 ships of the 1715 treasure fleet were wrecked, roughly 4 are still considered lost or only partially identified. Even today, as rare as it might be, beachgoers, fishermen, and tourists will still find the odd golden doubloon washed up on a beach or hidden in a mangrove grove along the lagoon. The Spanish salvaged what they could. They set up camp and began recovery operations while waiting for rescue. And then those abandoned men, the privateers England left to die, heard about it. Men like Henry Jennings, Charles Vane, men with ships, guns, and nothing left to lose. The pirates didn't choose the black flag. England handed it to them. And the treasure they were hunting? The richest fleet in Spanish history, scattered along a coast that would one day be called the Treasure Coast? That was a prize worth going after. That's where our story begins. Not with the treaty, not with the treasure, but with the moment those men looked at each other in Nassau, hungry and desperate, and realized Spain's loss was their golden opportunity, and they took it. December 1715, a Spanish mail ship, weeks out from Havana, sails peaceably through the Bahamas. The crew thinks they're safe. The war is over. The pirates, they tell each other, are somewhere else. They're wrong. The men who take them have no flag, no commission, no country. Their names are Henry Jennings and Charles Vane, but those names mean nothing yet. Soon they will. They drag the captain, Pedro de la Vega, to his feet, put a knife to his throat, and ask one question: where is the gold? De la Vega talks. He tells them everything. The hurricane that hit July 31st, the 11 ships lost, over 1,000 sailors drowned. He tells them the treasure is scattered across the seafloor and washing up on beaches near a place the Spanish call Playa de los Cabos. The Spanish survivors, about 1,500 of them, had crawled onto a barrier island south of what's now called Sebastian Inlet. They had built a camp. They sent for help from Havana and started pulling gold, silver, and precious gems from the shallows of the ocean. By late August, relief ships arrived. They stored the recovered treasure in huts guarded by 60 soldiers, and they thought they were safe. They absolutely were not. Jennings and Vane hit the camp with 3 vessels and 300 men. The Spanish never had a chance. The pirates walked away with 87,500 pounds in gold and silver, millions in today's money, loaded it onto their ships, and vanished back into the deep blue sea. They sailed for Nassau, a harbor on the island of New Providence in the Bahamas. And here's where the story gets strange. Nassau had been more or less abandoned. In 1703, then again in 1706, combined French and Spanish fleets attacked the town, burned it, sacked it, and carried off the governor in chains. The English government, busy fighting a war in Europe, never sent help, never rebuilt the fort, and never came back. By 1713, when the war ended, Nassau was a ghost of its former self. No governor, no garrison, and no law. Just a few empty buildings, a shallow harbor perfect for small ships, and a few dozen families trying to scratch out a living as best as they could. Then the privateers started arriving. Men who'd spent 10 years raiding Spanish ships, now unemployed, unwelcome in ports that remembered who they were and who they are. They looked at Nassau's burned-out fort, its abandoned streets, its perfect harbor, and they saw something no one else did: a home. By early 1716, Nassau had become something the world had never seen: a pirate republic. Men like Benjamin Hornigold arrived first, a privateer who'd turned pirate when the war ended. He brought crews, ships, and a certain rough charisma. He named himself Captain of Captains. Then Jennings showed up with 87,000 pounds of Spanish gold. Suddenly, every unemployed sailor in the Caribbean wanted to be in Nassau. The governor of Bermuda wrote to London that year, panicked. Over 1,000 pirates were now in Nassau. They outnumbered the honest inhabitants 10 to 1. But here's what the governor didn't understand, what no one really understood. The pirates weren't just a mob, they were building something. Each ship that came had its own code, written rules the crew voted on, signed, swore to uphold. Things like no gambling, no fighting on board, and lights out at 8. And they had compensation for the injured. 600 pieces of 8 for the loss of a right arm. What they were doing was dangerous, and they made sure their fellow pirates were taken care of. They elected captains by popular vote, and could remove them just as fast. They chose quartermasters to distribute plunder fairly, settle disputes, and keep the peace. The quartermaster was as important and as powerful a position on board a ship as the captain. Nearly 100 years before the American Revolution, experiments in democracy were being carried out on the decks of pirate ships. It wasn't always peaceful. Hornigold and Jennings were rivals. Their crews sometimes clashed, but they also knew, alone they were hunted. Together they would be able to survive. They called themselves the Flying Gang, and when the governor of Bermuda said there were over 1,000 pirates in Nassau, he wasn't counting the ones at sea. News of Jennings's raid spread like fire. Suddenly every pirate in the Bahamas knew the Spanish wrecks were a gold mine, but not in the way you might think. They didn't dive for treasure, they didn't drag the bottom, they let the Spanish do that. Then when the Spanish had recovered the gold, they took it. Over the next 2 years, pirates raided Spanish salvage camps up and down the Florida coast. Jennings went back twice more. Others soon followed. The Spanish built stronger forts and brought in more soldiers. It didn't matter. The pirates just kept coming. By 1716, Nassau was the pirate capital of the world. Benjamin Hornigold was training a young captain named Edward Teach, a man the world would soon call Blackbeard. Henry Jennings was mentoring Charles Vane, Jack Rackham, and Anne Bonny. They had their own republic, their own laws, their own flag, and they had something else. Something Spain was about to learn the hard way. The pirates had realized they didn't need to hunt for treasure, they just needed to hunt the people who'd already found it. So there they were, thousands of them, abandoned by the country that they had fought for, hunted by the empire they'd spent a decade fighting. They had through nothing but sheer will built their own republic in Nassau, made their own rules, and elected their own captains. And when Spanish gold washed up on Florida beaches, they didn't dive for it. They found the people who did, and took it from them. The Golden Age of Piracy wasn't born in a tavern or a treasure cave. It was born in the moment England made a deal to trade human slaves and left its own men to die. If you want more stories of the pirates who ruled the seas, and the empires that made them, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell. We've only just started. This has been For What It's Worth.